Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Football Fix live stream. My name is FPL Nacho, and we are kicking off the season finally with the first live stream of the season. It is so good to be back in the studio discussing what we all love, which is fantasy football. So please do, in the comment section, drop a like and say hello. Let me know you're in the chat. I can already see Never Give Up FPL in the chat. Hope you're doing well. Adam, hope you're doing well, mate. And Alice, how's everyone's drafts looking? We are going to be touching on that later on in this live stream. So, as you guys saw in the title, we are going to be discussing first drafts going into game week 1. And in particular, my first draft. I had probably my best ever season. Well, I know for a fact my best ever season, finishing 270th last season in the world. So I have a lot of pressure going into this season to actually perform quite well. So fingers crossed we can have a good start to the season. And that is going to be kicking off with the first drafts. I know there's a lot of drafts out there right now. I just want to reveal to you guys what I'm looking at right now, some of the players and structures that I'm kind of aiming towards and why that is the sort of structure I'm going towards. So that is going to be the main focus of this live stream. And then we're going to be touching on the projected points going into the new season as well. We've just started to kick that off on the Fantasy Football Fix site as well. So really looking forward to revealing those top players over the next 5 game weeks. And then importantly, we're going to be looking at the consensus 11 as well, which is an amalgamation of some of the best managers in the world. I can see GV, hello FPL Nacho, hope you're doing well, mate. And Mads, good afternoon from Norway. Hope you're doing well out there. Great to see the overseas there. Tuning in. So as I mentioned, guys, this is the first live stream of the season. We've got some great new graphics and just great content this season. So if you are new around here, please do drop a subscribe on the channel. We are going to be looking to bring it back daily videos kicking off basically next week onwards, which we're really looking forward to doing. Plenty of pre-season content, and then we're going to be progressing into the season. Of course, live streams every Friday like we done last season, and really looking forward to getting into it, guys. So let me know in the chat how's your planning going. Have you got a draft basically sorted? Because the way my draft's going right now, I'm pretty happy with it. So it's going to be really interesting to see over the coming weeks whether certain players raise their hand, whether they should be a consideration into our drafts, or whether those typical players in the top 6 size are going to be continually in our drafts from week in, week out. I personally think there's probably about 6 or 7 players that are almost locked into a lot of teams, in particular looking at the ownership of a lot of those players right now in the game. I believe there's about 7 players exceeding 40% ownership, which is really making up that template in the game. So it'd be very interesting to look at our projected points later and see if there's any sort of differentials emerging that we maybe can jump onto to have a nice start to the season. I see Cheekster in the chat as well. Hope you are doing well, buddy. Obviously a regular on the streams of last season. So I think we can't beat around the bush, guys. Let's get straight into my current FPL draft going into game week 1. Right, guys, so here is my current draft as we speak. Now, I've gone for the classic 4-4-2 formation. I know that right now it's very template and kind of the way that a lot of managers are going right now, but I really do think it provides the flexibility that is essential to the start of the season. So I'm going to run through the players. Then we're going to be touching on the structure of the team, why I really do favour the 4-4-2. And then we can also talk about some potential replacements in this team and some targets that I'm eyeing up later down the line. So first up in between the sticks, I've got Raya in goal at 4.5 million at Brentford. Now, it's worth mentioning there are quite a few options available at 4.5 million. We've got Raya, we've got Pickford at Everton. That one's a bit of a question mark if you ask me. And then, of course, we have the other fan favourite, Sanchez at Brighton. So right now, I've currently favoured Raya. A little bit of uncertainty right now at Brighton how Basuma leaving the club is going to affect them from a defensive perspective. I think it's worth noting that with Graham Potter, the sort of way that he plays, the way he coaches his teams, I really do think that he'll be able to adapt without Basuma, but I want to see a bit more in pre-season whether they are going to still be a solid base in terms of defence. But I was really impressed with Raya at Brentford, in particular when he came back from that injury. Brentford naturally became a better team and the underlying stats were a lot better when he was between the sticks. So he is right now the 4.5 million goalkeeper of choice. Now, before we go into the defence, a quick sort of discussion on goalkeepers and the 4.5 millions and the 5 millions available. So it's one of those seasons where we've actually got 5.5 million goalkeepers. The 6 million goalkeepers have been completely blown out of the water, which is great for the game. It really makes those 5.5 million goalkeepers available to us. And those are Alisson, Edison, and Lloris. Now, I really do think that those 5.5s are value this season and are definitely worth our consideration. But I really do think with some of the teams, in particular Liverpool, having a goalkeeper at 5.5 million and taking up a valuable Liverpool slot isn't worth it in the long term. And I really think in the future it's going to be a transfer waiting to happen. So while I do think Alisson's a nice pick at 5.5, I just don't want to be taking up a Liverpool slot in that area. And in terms of Edison at 5.5, that's the route I would go for if I went for a 5.5 million goalkeeper. But as I said, I really do see goalkeepers as the least important position in a team. I really think that 1 million that you could save and invest elsewhere in your squad will pay dividends later down the season. So that's why I'm opting for 4.5 million in rare right now. I want to put as little money into my goalkeepers and invest the rest into the defense, midfield and forwards. In particular, what's value available to us this season. And you can see there I've got Darlow as the reserve goalkeeper. Nobody's emerged yet in the 4.5 in the 4 million bracket as anybody that we can consider. So Darlow is the option right now for me. I'm conscious that of course he isn't going to necessarily be anywhere near the 1 or 2 spot for them this season. And I see Chinesa in the chat. Hope you're doing well. Obviously, guys, as I mentioned, please do put your comments in the chat. Let me know what your thoughts are on the draft on screen. Do you have players very similar to what I have right now, or are you dipping in and out with certain players? I know there's a lot of great strategies out there. Some managers going for the 3 premium, which I really think we need to consider this season. It's just finding that right balance. And I can see Never Give Up FPL saying jumped off the Perisic and Neto train. And this is something I'm going to definitely touch on with my draft here. So coming into the defense, and I think, as I mentioned, there's a few players in my team that are absolutely locked. And 2 of those are going to be Cancelo and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, Trent Alexander-Arnold coming in at 7.5 million is one of the steals of the century in FPL. He has been so consistent. I believe he's been about 185 to 190 average FPL points over the last 4 seasons, which is absolutely outrageous. And him being priced 7.5 million, try and find me a player priced 7.5 million in the midfields or the forwards that's going to get anywhere near him this season. I really can't see it at all. So I think Trent is an obvious pick in my draft right now. I think Robertson is a really nice double up, but I don't think he's necessarily right to go for a replacement of Trent. And in terms of Cancelo, we know his underlying stats were phenomenal last season. Now, I do think that this is the opportunity potentially, if you are looking to save a bit of money, to go down to somebody like Laporte or maybe even Diaz. But I think Cancelo is a perfect example of somebody where you're going to own Diaz or Laporte, and you are just going to be seeing these opportunities created by Cancelo, these occasional assists and goals scored by Cancelo. And I think you're just going to regret straight from the off not investing that additional 1 million into the best defender in that Man City backline. And I would argue one of the best value defenders in the game. So I think, yes, you can go cheaper with Diaz and Laporte. I think you cut your losses. You can make cuts elsewhere in your squad. And I think Cancelo is one of them that is right alongside Trent as one of the essential defenders to own going into game week 1. Now, coming on to the next 2 defenders here, I think are a bit more questionable. Reece James, I do think, is a brilliant FPL option. There's absolutely no question about it. But I think there's a few question marks right now in regards to Chelsea as a team. So obviously, Thiago Silva staying on from last season, and Koulibaly has now been signed as a secondary centre-back. I still think it's very unclear whether Tuchel is going to go for a 4 at the back or a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3 formation, effectively a wing-backs. Now, of course, if Chelsea do adopt the wing-back formation, then that makes James and Chilwell unbelievable value at their price point at 6 million. Again, these are players that probably are very difficult for us to ignore if we are going into that sort of avenue where Tuchel's playing that formation. So hopefully a lot of preseason games are going to reveal that to us. I think the big debate with Reece James right now is whether to go for Reece James or for Ben Chilwell. Now, Ben Chilwell's underlying stats are very difficult to come to any sort of conclusions right now, just because it's such a small sample size. Now, one thing that's worth noting from Chelsea of last season was that the right-hand side of Chelsea, and this coming from a Chelsea fan with a little bit of knowledge in the team. So, the right-hand side of Chelsea was much more predominant in terms of possession-based. Reece James, probably a lot more comfortable on the ball than Ben Chilwell. A lot more development from the midfield and possession and control of the game. Whereas when you saw with Chelsea on that left flank with Alonso and Chilwell, it very much was all about the offensive and getting those two players, whichever one was playing left wing back, into the 18-yard box and 6-yard box to really be on the end of these sort of crosses. Now, the reason they were able to do that last season is one, because of a world-class centre-back in Rudiger being able to just tidy up everything behind them. That is going to be a big question mark going into this season, because if we do keep the 3 at the back and a 5 in midfield or a 4 in midfield, is the replacement of Rudiger going to be able to carry the load that comes with Ben Chilwell bombing forward into the 6-yard and 18-yard box? I think there was a real emphasis on Rudiger, which went massively under the radar, where he was kind of cleaning up all the jobs and spaces in that spot. So it is worth noting that in regards to how Ben Chilwell is going to attack. If that defender in the left-sided centre-back can't start quickly this season, we might see a little bit more hesitancy from those sort of wing-backs, in particular Ben Chilwell bombing forward, but it is going to be very interesting to see how that does adapt. Now, in terms of underlying stats, we know that Chilwell is the man in terms of goals scored. James is more of the chance creation in terms of set pieces and obviously those balls in the box. So right now, I've gone for Reece James, but I do think that Ben Chilwell is a brilliant option in regards to those goal potential there. And I'm not endorsing fizzy drinks here, guys, at all. Right then, so my fourth and final defender in this starting 11 is Spurs' Perisic. Now, this is the one that I think's really split the FPL community right now. And I really do think that this is something that we can definitely have a discussion on. 5.5 million for a player of Perisic's quality could be phenomenal value going into this season. It is worth mentioning. Now, I think with Perisic, I think we all know what's going to happen inevitably. We're going to be getting a brilliant value player who is likely going to come off around the 60, 65, 70 minute mark consistently to be replaced with Ryan Sessegnon. Now, this is a player in Ryan Sessegnon that got the responsibility of Conte and the trust of Conte to be basically in that Champions League running going into the back end for them for that top 4. Now, of course, Reguilon really fell out of favour with Conte, but I think there was enough responsibility and trust in Sessegnon to think that there is going to be a competitive nature on that left wing back spot this season. And the same is going to go for that right wing back spot as well. Need to remember that Tottenham have just signed Jed Spence in a £20 million deal, and they also have Emerson Royal alongside Doherty. So if you are looking for a cheaper alternative to Perisic on that right wing back spot, I'm sorry to burst your balloon, but I think there's going to be as much rotation on that right wing back spot as on this left wing back spot. So it's worth noting that. Now, does the risk of minutes compensate for this rotation in Perisic because of the potential output that he's going to have from an attacking perspective? Now, first and foremost, it's worth noting that when we have new players into the league, this is always a risk that we have to take if you want to own them in this first game week. We never know how they're going to adapt to the Premier League, whether they're going to be hitting the ground running like someone like Luis Diaz, or they're going to be taking weeks and weeks to adapt to the game. In particular, a player like Perisic in a Conte system, which is basically required to be at 100% full tilt for the time he's on the field. So, of all the defenders that I have right now, Perisic is the one that I'm questioning right now, mainly because does his potential rotation justify the 5.5 million bracket? Or can we make sacrifices elsewhere in the team and upgrade him to somebody like maybe a double up in the Chelsea defence and Ben Chilwell, where I know I've got guaranteed game time and arguably equally potential attacking output. So I think that is the real question mark right now. Let me know in the chat, guys, in regards to what your thoughts are on Perisic. I really think over the last few weeks, he has definitely split opinion. And it's also worth mentioning as well that he hasn't really started preseason training yet. He's been sitting out of a lot of training sessions. I don't believe he's had any minutes in games yet. Of course, we still have a bit of time till the season kicks off, but with Conte drilling these players, I would question that if he isn't fully fit, and someone like Ryan Sessegnon is, don't be surprised if Ryan Sessegnon does kick on the season in that left wing back role until Perisic is fully up to speed. Now, I can see in the chat here, Michael saying James and Chilwell are so attacking that it would be crazy to play a flat back 4 line. I absolutely agree there. It would be criminal to play those two in that position. Now, of course, with Liverpool adopting that back 4, there is, of course, that potential for them to still be excellent FPL options. But it does feel like with them in particular being so competent in front of goal, you are really taking away such an important part of that Chelsea team from a goal scoring perspective. Now, while I think Tuchel does want to play a back 3 with a 5 or 4 in midfield, it's all about the recruitment going into it. With Koulibaly now locked in and Thiago Silva, it's whether he puts the trust on Chalobah, Azpilicueta if he doesn't go to Barcelona, or someone like Colwell, who I think is going out on loan or permanent sell. Now, the question mark is if they can get that third centre-back in, then I think a back three is definitely going to be the viable option going forward. If they can't recruit well, then he might have his hand forced to go into a back four until potentially a player emerges in that Chelsea team as an understudy to Rudiger. So it is worth mentioning that totally. And I can see here as well, in terms of never give up FPL, going for chill out as well. Cheekster, fizzy drinks endorsement needed. Lol, yes, I am not an addict, but I do like fizzy drinks, I can't lie. And we got Fayad saying, my draft. Okay, we'll cover drafts in a minute, Fayad, 100% once I've wrapped up this one here. So let's go into the midfielders, guys. And as I mentioned, players that are in every single one of my drafts, and Mo Salah is going to be another example of that. So right now, in a lot of my drafts, I have Cancelo, Trent, and Salah in pretty much the predominant all of them. Now, Mo Salah, we're going to be looking at it later on with some of the stats over the next 5 game weeks, why I think he is still the best player to own in the game. But with those opening fixtures, in particular, away to Fulham, I really do think that's a brilliant fixture to kick off the season. Over the past few years against promoted sides, he's been an absolute bully against these teams, racking up monster hauls. And I think it's just really dangerous to go without someone like Salah in that opening game week. Now, I think the question mark is not necessarily do you go without a premium in the midfield. It's whether you go $1 million down to someone like Kevin De Bruyne or somebody like, somebody like Son in the midfield. So those are definitely the options right now for us to consider. But I just personally think you go all the way up to Salah, see if he can actually hit the ground running. And then if not, you have all of the flexibility available to you because you have the most expensive player in the game to go down into somebody in that department. You need to remember, if you go down the Son route without Mo Salah or you go for Kevin De Bruyne, you need to then source that additional 1 million to get yourself back up to Mo Salah. And I know for sure, if you go without Mo Salah and he hits a hat-trick against Fulham away in game week 1, you are going to be selling everybody, your mum, your gran, everybody, to get that 1 million to go up into him for game week 2. So it is worth mentioning that. If you go without Mo Salah, how you get into him if he does kick on like he does in most seasons. So it is worth mentioning that. Now, I've gone for the Liverpool double up in midfield with Diaz. Again, I do apologise. The graphics are a little bit wrong there with the Liverpool away. They're not playing themselves. I do apologise on that one there. So I do think that this is the argument right now for a lot of drafts out there, whether we go for the Salah, Diaz double up in midfield, or we go for the Trent Robertson double up in defence, sacrificing Diaz. Now, I think the ceiling for Diaz has really been increased over pre-season because of what he'd done in the second half of last season when he joined from Porto in January. Now, I wouldn't say Diaz necessarily ripped up trees from an attacking perspective in FPL. He wasn't banging braces and hat-tricks. It very much was, underlying stats-wise, were looking great for him. The liveliness, a lot of people in the FPL community know how funny that is, but he was looking very, very good on the eye test, very, very creative in that Liverpool team. And with the selling of Mane, the anticipation that Diaz has basically got that shirt for the left-handed side of that front three in this Liverpool team. And game time, I think, isn't a worry now for somebody like Diaz. I think there's general rotation that will happen now that we have 5 subs in the league. So right now I've opted for the Salah and Diaz route. I just think that's where I lie with it as we speak. I think as well the potential for Diaz is a little bit higher with the ceiling. So I've just opted for Diaz. Let me know in the chat, guys, what your thoughts are. Are you Robertson or are you Diaz? I think that's the real question mark right now, where to go in that team. Now we've got 2 players who I am very dubious about right now, and I know they're splitting a lot of opinion in FPL as we speak. And I see FPL Phillips there saying about the Jota injury as well, which is very, very true. We do need to remember that Jota is carrying injury in pre-season. Yes, he could be available for game week 1, but I always do think if there is a setback in pre-season, that will mean a setback in the season, unless you are an absolute essential cog in a team. And I think with Jota, you don't need to rush him into this team necessarily, especially with someone like Diaz and Salah in that front 3. So now for the 2 budget, I would say budget mid-price midfielders in the draft, and that is going to be Pedro Neto and Martinelli. Now, Neto has really been the one that we have had plenty of discussions about. Half of the community think he's the best value player in the game. The other half think, what has he done the last 2 years? Why has he got all this hype? Now, I think it really is all about those fixtures for Wolves. The opening 5 fixtures for Wolves are absolutely brilliant. And the anticipation is that Neto is likely going to be the talisman in this Wolves team going into the season. Now, I've currently got him as a placeholder because I don't believe there's anybody around the 5.5 million mark that is anywhere near him in terms of potential value. But it's all about right now assumption in regards to Neto. I think we're all hoping and anticipating that there could be a breakout season for him, but we need to remember Wolves from an attacking perspective are very, very limited. They might adapt under Bruno Lage this season, but if there's anything from last season to go by, we're not going to be getting monster hauls from Neto or big returns from Wolves assets from an attacking perspective. But I do think at 5.5 million, he's definitely going to be in my team right now until we develop over pre-season to get an idea about him. And Martinelli is exactly the same player in that situation as well. I've got a bit more trust in Martinelli as an FPL asset, but it's all about that game time for him. Whereas Neto, I think, has got the guaranteed game time. I think Martinelli is a little bit more of a question mark in how Arteta approaches this season. Now, I do think that Martinelli is likely the number one starter if they went for a front three, with him being on the left-hand side, Jesus down the middle, Saka down the right. And then I'm anticipating potentially an Odegaard, Thomas Partey, and then maybe a Vieira or maybe a Zinchenko if they do sign him in the three behind them. Again, if it is any Arsenal fans in the chat, please do let me know if I got that horribly wrong. But that's kind of the way I'm anticipating it right now for that Arsenal team. And it's 6 million with the opening fixtures that Arsenal do have. If we can get a little bit of information over pre-season, I really think Martinelli is an amazing value pick. So let's wrap up this team. Top two. Gabriel Jesus at 8 million is absolutely ridiculous value. I don't see anybody else featuring in that forward role. Yes, I know Nketiah is waiting in the wings, but I just don't see a time where Jesus isn't going to be featuring for Arsenal consistently. I don't see a spell where he sat on the bench for weeks on end. You might get the occasional time where Nketiah's fancied over Jesus, but I really do think that Jesus offers everything that Nketiah could do. Loves to run the channels, decent to hold up play, quite underrated actually, because in that Man City team, they had no chances of running in behind the defence from a distance perspective. Obviously, they made those inside runs between the lines, but he had to learn to hold up the play, obviously, with this Man City team and play intricate football. That is really going to be in Jesus' favour in this Arteta team. So I really think Jesus is an amazing pickup, and he's currently in my draft. And Haaland makes up the final one in the front two. Now, I've looked at a lot of underlying stats between these two, Haaland and Harry Kane, because I think that's where the deliberation is right now. Now, Man City's fixtures are ridiculous over the opening 8 game weeks. They're absolutely amazing. They have some phenomenal home games against the likes of Bournemouth in game week 2 and some real potential there. And I think a lot of the ownership in Haaland is out of complete fear and ceiling that he could achieve. Now, the alternative is you go for Harry Kane, who's a proven FPL asset and who I believe the whole August curse isn't going to happen because Conte is such a phenomenal manager. He knows that he's going for the league this year. And in order to win the league, you've got to start quick. And in order to start quick, you need your talisman players hitting the ground running. And I think Harry Kane absolutely falls into that category. So I think it is so close between Haaland and Kane. And I can't even sit here and tell you that Kane isn't going to be Haaland or vice versa come game week 1. I think the fear of not having Haaland at 65% ownership is where I think the decision is going to be made between a lot of managers. Those managers that, you know, favour ownership and all this sort of effective ownership are going to be in the Haaland camp. If you go on tried and trusted assets and you don't worry about ownership, then Kane is your man. And I just don't know which manager I am right now going into the season. Now, as I mentioned, the one thing I want to quickly touch on, structure of this team. You cannot win FPL in the first few game weeks, but you definitely can give yourself an Everest to climb if you have a terrible start, basically. And I really do think if you go too differential, then you are going to really struggle if it backfires for you. Now, there is no shame in being template in the opening game weeks. I repeat, there is no shame. Don't worry if you see your team being the same as every single FPL manager. The template is a template for a reason. It's because they are some of the best value players available. My personal approach in all weeks and seasons is to go roughly template with maybe one differential against the grain and then look to move away from the template later down the season. I know it's boring, but unfortunately it's just some home truths in terms of the opening game weeks. If you go too against the grain, you say to yourself, I'm not going to have a premium midfielder. And as we expect, Salah and Son bang, you have given yourself such a task to get that player into your team. And the same goes for the likes of Jesus and Haaland. If you want to go against the grain, that's absolutely fine. But just be anticipating the backlash that you could have in your points if you don't go for those template players. So it is worth mentioning that. So guys, let me know about the team. Oh, bench. Justin, I think he could be the best 4.5 million defender, but there's a slight rotation risk about him. It is worth mentioning. Andreas Pereira, Man United player, now been sold to Fulham. He's going to replace Carvalho in that attacking mid role at Fulham. He could be amazing value, and I think he's the number one 4.5 million midfielder. Greenwood, no, not the Greenwood that you're thinking about. Leeds is Greenwood, 4.5 million forward. And effectively, it'll be Andreas Pereira and Justin rotating as the first subs on the game week in, week out. So that's the draft, guys. That is the draft. Let me know in the chat what your thoughts are. I'm going to quickly cover some of the questions, and then we're going to go into the projected points for the opening 5 game weeks. And if you are watching, guys, and you haven't dropped a like, what are you playing at? Please do drop a like on the stream. It's massively appreciated. It'd be great if we continue the trend that we've had every single live stream last season, where we hit a minimum of 50 likes. And if you're watching, you don't want to be that guy or gal who doesn't like this video. So please do that. It was massively appreciated. Okay, so just going to quickly wrap up some of the comments in here. Neil saying, I'm wondering about Son instead of Salah. Son is within single digits of Salah over the past 2 seasons. Absolutely. I cannot knock anybody that goes for Son. How can you? His underlying stats are phenomenal. His output is phenomenal. And importantly, he's probably playing in the best Spurs side we have seen in years. It isn't a whole, oh no, Kane or Son, and that's it. We're looking at Richarlison, Kulusevski, Bentancur. We're seeing a real level to Spurs that has increased over the last 6 to 8 months. And I only see Kane and Son becoming better FPL assets than they were last season, which is crazy to think. And it makes me think, what the heck am I doing not having any of them in my team? So I absolutely agree. Son is a brilliant option, and I cannot knock you for going for that route. The only reason I think Salah is a better pick is, first and foremost, he's still one of the best players in the game. And secondly, it just gives you that flexibility. If you're in a position where Salah doesn't hit the ground running, and in 2 game weeks you think, no, this is a different Salah, he's clearly over the hill, you can easily drop down to Son. Whereas if Son doesn't hit the ground running and Salah is absolutely banging week in, week out, you effectively need to, as I mentioned, find that million to get yourself back up, which could come at a points cost. So that's my only question mark right now for you is Son going to keep up? I absolutely think he could, but are you willing to take the risk of that 1 million and potential transfer down the line? That's all I am thinking there. Michael saying a punt on Rashford 6.5 looks tempting. Scored in pre-season's day. If he gets anywhere near his best, it could be good. Martial looks back to his best in pre-season at 7 million. Michael, that's an absolutely spot on shout there. And I really think the Man United assets could be the game breakers in FPL, because we spoke about it at the end of last season. Leicester, Man United, these sort of underperforming teams are going to be absolute gems this season. And FPL have not only made them gems, they have made them, I don't even know, just like diamonds, like the most ridiculous stuff. And honestly, if Rashford does become the left-sided, right-sided or forward in that Man United attack, then you just stick him with a team, you leave him. Honestly, guys, I don't see a situation where you don't own Rashford in game week 1 if pre-season highlights that they're not going to sign a forward and he is absolutely in that front line. At 6.5 million, it is outrageous value. And yes, while Man United's fixtures are a little bit dubious, you know, I would much rather go for a 6.5 million Rashford that starts every week, downgrade Neto to a 4.5, and then upgrade Martinelli to a Rashford, in my personal opinion. I think Sancho as well is definitely worth keeping an eye on as well. He looks really good in the pre-season, but it's just whether you want to pay that additional 1 million than Rashford if we see Rashford emerge as a player this season. Okay, guys, so next week we're going to be looking at projected points over the next 5 game weeks. I think this is a brilliant opportunity to see what sort of players we should have on our radar. Are there any players that you haven't had on your radar that you should have on your radar? And I think this is going to be a really interesting slide for us to check out. Okay, guys, so here it is. Let us know in the chat what you're thinking about the new setup of the live stream. We've gone very different this season. We're really happy with the approach that we've gone here. So let us know, Do you prefer it? Do you love it? I hope you love it, because we absolutely love it at our end here. So we've got the top 10 predicted points over the next 5 game weeks here. And these projected points have been calculated based on the stats per 90 of last season. So we've got accurate data here. Now, again, it's worth mentioning, new signings like Haaland, for example, are quite difficult to predict because, first and foremost, we don't know his responsibility in this Man City team. And of course, we're taking data from a completely different league. So what I would say is, with new signings, just take it with a little pinch of salt, because, again, there is no necessarily underlying data for us to be taking to make our projections, but we are trying them as best as possible here. So we'll start from the bottom here and working our way up. 10th, Robertson at 24.8 points. Now, at 7 million, as we discussed, he is still phenomenal value. I know he's only 0.5 less than Trent. We would like to have him being 1 million less to make it a bit more of a deliberation. But I think at 7 million, Robertson poses amazing value going into this season. And you can see that projected points over the next 5. You don't see Diaz in this top 10 here. So my question is that enough of a reason here to think the double up in the Liverpool defence is the route that we should be going? For us to choose Diaz at 1 million more, which is worth mentioning, then I would be wanting to see Diaz not only in this top 10, but considerably above Robertson in the projected points. Now, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but it is worth mentioning that a big reason for going for Diaz at 8 million is because I think if you go for the Trent, Cancelo, Robertson, James backline, you might struggle to get the Salah and 8 million midfielder in order to afford Jesus and Haaland up front. And I really do think that the 8 million slot in midfield is quite an important spot in your team from a structural perspective. Just to name a few, Kulusevski, Mason Mount, Saka, and of course Diaz, all priced at 8 million. And if you were to have Mo Salah at 13 million, and then your next highest player, 6 million in someone like Martinelli, or 6.5 million in Rashford, you've got a massive gap there where you don't have any investment in players where you can easily make a sideways move to them if they start to hit the ground running. What I really like with the 8 million midfielders is that if you go for one and another one starts to hit the ground running and you want to move sideways to them, you can easily do so as long as they haven't risen in price. If you have 2 million, 3 million to climb up to or go down to, then it starts to become a bit more difficult in your team. So it is worth mentioning that when we are looking at the projected points of Robertson in terms of a Liverpool double up. Now you can see here, Reece James projected to score 25.2 points over the opening 5 game weeks. We haven't got Chilwell on there, which is worth mentioning. So James is leading the way in regards to returns over the opening 5 game weeks. And as I mentioned, at 6 million, we know he's going to get guaranteed game time. He's got no competition at that right back or right wing back spot, depending on where he operates. So I think Reece James is such an easy pick for your teams if you are having question marks about Ben Chilwell and that Chelsea back line. Harry Kane at 26 projected points. Again, we know what we're getting with him. And while Haaland's underlying stats aren't there from the Premier League, we know what we are getting with Harry Kane. We're getting penalties. We're getting a focal point in that Spurs attack, which I am anticipating to be better this season. And we're getting decent long-term fixtures as well for him. So if you're looking at Haaland's 33.1 projected points and thinking, oh, these are taken from the Bundesliga, I don't know how much to read into it. We know with Kane's underlying stats of last season, we could come to quite a decent conclusion. And I think 26 projected points over the opening 5 is a decent benchmark for us to have for him. So Alexander-Arnold, 26.7, about 2 points more than Robertson. And I think that's probably fair considering he is 0.5 million more expensive than Robertson. I've touched on him. I do think he is the best Liverpool defensive option still going into game week 1. And then we see Son at 28 projected points. So a whole 2 projected points more than Harry Kane. And he is coming in at 0.5 million more. So we would expect to see this on our projected points table. Otherwise, it'd be a no-brainer to go to Kane if he was projected to score more than Son. Now with Son, again, as I mentioned, a brilliant option. But can you compensate Salah for Son? Can you go both? That is the argument we need to have in FPL right now. It's crazy to think that a joint Golden Boot winner and Son with the underlying stats he's had isn't in more teams. He should be at 40, 50% ownership. But it's all about the value of the other players, which makes it so difficult to integrate Son into those teams. But again, absolutely no complaints if you are looking to go for Son in your side. Now, a dubious one here is Ronaldo, 10.5 million forward at 28.1 projected points. Ronaldo, for all of his haters out there, still put up decent numbers last season in that Man United shirt when he did feature under Solskjaer. And of course, under that interim manager, which was an absolute stinker for the club. Now, with Ronaldo at 28.1, first and foremost, we don't even know if he's going to come into the season as a Man United player. So from an ownership right now in the game, it is rock bottom because there's so much uncertainty about the player. If we do get clarity and we see Ten Hag come out and actually say that he is the number one forward in that Man United team, I think that's the only way we can consider him as an FPL option. Otherwise, it sounds crazy because he's one of the best goal scorers in the world still. But at 10.5 million, I don't see the value for Cristiano Ronaldo because there's so many question marks about his importance in the team, his minutes in the team, too much there for us to consider. So while he's projected to do well, I don't think it's worth the risk at all. So now we're into the top four. Mahrez at 31.6. Absolutely love him as an FPL option, but can you stomach it? Can you have him? This is the big question. His minutes are so sporadic. Yes, we've sold Gabriel Jesus and Sterling has now gone to Chelsea. That should mean Mahrez gets more minutes in that team. But some really interesting discussions going in the FPL community about if Haaland features and Mahrez plays, then there isn't much of a frontline press for Man City. There's no concrete evidence about this, but we would anticipate with the outgoings of Sterling and Gabriel Jesus and a new contract for Mahrez, that game time is on the horizon for him. And with 31.6 projected points, we know that when he is on the field, he is one of the best FPL options in the game. But it's when he's on the field, which is a big question. And with Foden, Grealish, players that can operate in those positions, I think rotation is definitely going to be happening for him. And at 8 million, although I think he has the highest ceiling of the 8 million options, I'd probably rather go for someone like Diaz or Saka at Arsenal or Mason Mount at Chelsea, where I know I'm getting considerably more minutes in a not equally attacking team, but a decent attacking outlet as well. Now, Haaland, we've touched on him, 33.1. Underlying stats are difficult to take because of a different league and hasn't featured in that team before, so it is worth mentioning that. But I do think he is very hard to resist because of his ownership right now and the potential that he will have in that Man City team because they end up creating so much in that team. Now, De Bruyne at 33.8, again, this is going to come back exactly the same to Son. Can you feature De Bruyne in your team? Because of the ownership of Haaland at 60-65% ownership, I don't think it's a good use of your money to go for Haaland and Kevin De Bruyne. So if you go for Kevin De Bruyne in your side, then I think Harry Kane has to be your forward because you're going too heavy in the Man City investment. And while that sounds crazy because they are one of the best attacking teams in the league, I think spreading yourself over the top teams is a better strategy than going all in on one, which seems crazy because I know it's Man City, but I just think that going for one Man City attacking asset at that price range is the best use of your money. And you can see there last up, Salah, 35.3 projected points. Still one of the best FPL options to own in the game. And with that opening fixture, away to Fulham, get a promoted side, I can only see potential for him there. And I really think at 13 million, he's still amazing value in FPL. And I really do agree with the projected points here and why he should be essential in our Game Week 1 squads going into Game Week 1. So let me know in the chat, guys, what your thoughts are on the projected points. We're going to dip into the chat. We're going to have a little discussion. Let me know your thoughts. And then we're going to be looking at the consensus 11 going into Game Week 1, which is an amalgamation of the best FPL managers in the world. So you want to stick around for that to see if there are any similar to mine. And we have to agree as a community here, guys. If the consensus 11 is the same as mine, then effectively I'm a legendary manager and we can wrap it up there. No, of course not. But I would like to take that crown one day, obviously. Right then, so let's have a look at the chat a minute. So I can see here, Tez is saying, due to covering the masses, it's better to go with Haaland. But if Kane is in form, it's better to replace Haaland with Kane. And I absolutely agree with that. I do think because the disparity between Haaland and Kane's ownership being so huge, I think there's nearly 50% in it. I would much rather go for the risk of Haaland and then drop down to Harry Kane if we see just this absolute monster under Conte. Now, if they were close in ownership, then for me, there wouldn't be much of a debate. I would go for Harry Kane because I prefer going for tried and tested. I like my Ford Fiestas. I like the ones that are going to get me from A to B with no hiccups along the way. But I do think that Haaland with that ownership is a scary place to be if you don't own him. And as you mentioned, you can easily go sideways there. Michael, I would not touch Coutinho, only my opinion. Thoughts? Yes, I agree on that one right now. I think it was a very difficult time under Gerrard for us to put any conclusions on Aston Villa. They've signed decent recruits this summer, but I'm interested to see whether he goes for the two up top of Watkins and Ings, whether he goes for a front three of Watkins, Bailey, and other options that have left my mind. So it is worth mentioning right now. I think Coutinho has enough question marks about Aston Villa for us to maybe hold off on him for now. And Ori Peleg saying they have Raya as well, but Brentford has signed another goalkeeper. Yes, that is true. They have signed another goalkeeper. My reading into it is that it's almost a long-term investment from Brentford because Raya could leave the club in the future. The way Raya has been for the club and the unbelievable performances he's put in last season, I just can't imagine a world where he gets benched going into this season. So I think it's just a very solid backup goalkeeper for Raya personally. Cheekster, did FPL introduce any rule changes for the 22-23 season? Okay, that's a very, very good question, Cheekster, for anyone that doesn't know, really. So, the general rules of the game haven't changed. We still get a £100 million budget. We still have 15 players to choose from. The prices haven't changed. We don't have a lower baseline than 4 million defender, 4.5 million midfielder, 4.5 million forward. And of course, we have slightly different price ranges in the maxes of the players. But again, that's not necessarily a rule change. I think the big change that has happened in FPL is two things. Firstly, from a safety perspective, it's worth mentioning, you can do two-factor authentication, which I highly recommend you doing going into this season, guys. We had the problems through the FPL game last year where people were getting hacked. Please do have that incorporated this season so your team doesn't get compromised with. And obviously, the second actual strategy version is that we are getting unlimited transfers during the World Cup. So chips haven't changed. We still get one wildcard, two wildcards. I don't know why I've said it like that. We get two wildcards at different points in the season. We have one triple captain, one bench boost, and one free hit. Now, with the wildcard, you have to play the first wildcard before the World Cup, which I believe is in game week 16. So you have until game week 16 to play your first wildcard, otherwise you don't have it available to you. Then, during the World Cup, you have unlimited transfers, which enables you to completely change your team and go into game week 17 with that team. Then you have your second wildcard, I believe, later on in the season. I can't remember the date exactly. I do apologise. So that is worth mentioning. The World Cup is giving you unlimited transfers over that period. But other than that, I don't think there's any necessary rule changes to note. So it is worth mentioning. So we're saying about, is Sterling too expensive? I think that Sterling is going to be a phenomenal player at Chelsea, personally. It's exactly what Chelsea have needed, a goal scorer in front three for so long. And do I think he's too expensive? I think he is right now because of the value of the defenders, Salah's price, and the forwards. I think it's been very difficult for you to go Haaland up front, Salah, Sterling, all of the defenders in the back line. That's the reason why I think Sterling's just going to be a wait and see right now and see how they get on later on in the season. And Jacob saying, is it absolutely essential to have an 8 million midfielder? And no, while I don't think it's absolutely essential, I really do think that it is a get out of jail free card for you, because there's so many players in that price bracket that if you miss could really hurt you. Now, we have an amazing tool on Fantasy Football Fix where you basically can look at the average price of players over the course of the season that you own structurally. So for me personally, my average was having a 13 million midfielder, a 9.5 million midfielder, and then the 6 million, 4.5. It's a brilliant tool that we do have on the website. Again, guys, all the information is in the bio. Check it out. Check out the premium membership as well. You will not regret it. But I think with the 8 million range, with Saka, Mount, Kulusevski, Diaz, Bowen at 8.5 million, I think you need someone in that price bracket to give you the flexibility to go sideways if one of them really does hit the ground running. So while it's not essential, I do think that it is a real structurally sound move to make in your team. Okay, so I see we have other questions in the chat, but what I want to do quickly now is just show you guys the consensus 11 that we do have. Please do drop a like on this live stream if you haven't already, guys. I would massively appreciate it. As I mentioned, we always try to get to 50 likes. I see we're at 32 right now. If you can get us to 50, sorry, then I'll love you forever. Of course, I will love you forever. So let us check out the consensus 11, guys, and we can see how their team differs to mine. Okay, guys, so here is the consensus 11. Now, if you haven't seen it already, this is something we discussed about a lot last season. The consensus 11 is taken from our Elite 11, which is on fantasyfootballfix.com. Now, the Elite 11 are effectively some of the best FPL managers in the world who have had ridiculous FPL histories of top 5k finishes, top 10k finishes, you name it, they've had it. Now, the consensus 11 is an amalgamation of all their teams blended together to give us basically the average team that they all own. And this is it right now. Now, it's worth mentioning, because their drafts are ever changing, the consensus 11 is naturally ever changing. So again, if you want to be fully immersed in this world, please do check out all the information in the bio for fantasyfootballfix.com. It's just an amazing tool where you can basically get in the minds of some of the best FPL managers in the world. They do little diary notes where you can see their thought process in each and every one of their transfers. And importantly, you can see the transfers that they've made. This is a game changer, honestly. Sometimes I dip in, I look at it and go, right, one of the guys I follow has just done this transfer. A bit of confirmation bias allows me to think, if this guy's done it, then I know I should do it as well. So it's a real great way of just getting a bit of confirmation bias throughout the season. So here is the consensus 11. You can see it is slightly different to my current first draft from a structure perspective. Whereas I went for the 4-4-2 formation, they have opted for a 5-3-2 formation, what many call the Christmas tree. You can see that obviously with the shape. So Raya in goal seems to be the common theme right now at 4.5 million. And you will find with a lot of managers that have done very well over the years that the 4.5 million goalkeeper alongside a 4 million goalkeeper is usually the best route to go for. Because as I mentioned, when you look at the history of goalkeepers, the difference between the highest scoring goalkeeper at 6 million and the highest scoring goalkeeper at 4.5 million just isn't enough to pay that additional funds that is required. So that is why the 4.5 million goalkeeper is such a popular strategy in FPL. Now, with this team, you can see the double Chelsea defense is something that has been adopted here. And I really do like it. The one question mark I would have right now is the uncertainty we have right now at Chelsea with whether they are going to operate with wing-backs and whether they can recruit well in the market alongside Thiago Silva and Koulibaly. Because if they enter the season with just those two and Chalobah, for example, then we could be looking at less clean sheets potentially. But I don't think that will necessarily hinder Chilwell and James from an attacking perspective. And at 12 million combination for those two, it's outrageous value. It really is. Those two are cheaper than Salah alone, which is worth noting. And Perisic makes the team as well. We've discussed previously in the stream about my worry about Perisic and how Conte has put his trust in Sessegnon at the back end of last season. And I don't see that changing going into this season. So I really do think that Perisic's minutes can be managed. And I think while he is going to be the number one starter in that Spurs team, I think Conte will not be worried about rotating him. And I really do think that Perisic from an attacking output offers amazing value. But is it going to be enough to justify those rotation and minutes? We could easily go down to a 5 million in Matty Cash, Trippier at Newcastle, who offer us guaranteed minutes. So that's one that is going to be very interesting to see if it changes and evolves over the coming game weeks and weeks. I apologise. Now for the midfield. 3 players that I owned in my draft: Salah, Diaz and Neto. And what's important about this is the price ranges of each player. Salah offering the premium price bracket at 13 million, which gives you the flexibility to go to any player in the game in the midfield. So if Son or KDB go crazy at the start of the season, you can easily drop down to those. And equally, if Rashford or even higher up in terms of Sterling or Fernandes becomes amazing value, you can easily drop down to those players as well after you've invested so much in Mo Salah. Now, Diaz is the 8 million man right now, and I do think he is probably the highest owned 8 million midfielder right now in the game. And I think rightly so, because Liverpool's fixtures are so good. And it's one thing mentioned as well that the consensus 11 has gone for the double Liverpool midfield rather than the double Liverpool defence. That's just worth noting there. And Neto, again, value pick in the team at 5.5 million, making up the consensus 11. Still question marks about him, but while we are in the current status of the pre-season, I think he's a good placeholder for your teams. And last up, the usual duo, Jesus and Haaland make up the consensus 11. No arguments there right now. I don't think there's many other forwards we can contend with right now. I think Callum Wilson is going to be an amazing option. But with those tricky Newcastle fixtures over the opening 6, I don't really think you necessarily should go down to him. So Jesus and Haaland, very tough to argue. We've touched on Harry Kane versus Haaland. Please do check out the live stream previously where we discussed that. But Haaland at that ownership is just disgusting. It's so hard to ignore. Now, the bench, again, worth mentioning. With this structure, you do have a very, very weak bench with Murphy, Andreas Pereira and Greenwood. Now, I would probably say with Murphy, that's the Newcastle Murphy, I probably would say that Brentford's De Silva might be a bit more of a shrewder pick because he might just take over from Eriksen in that creative role at Brentford. So it is worth noting that I think he could be a better option than Murphy. And Greenwood, of course, being 4.5 million forward that all of us are naturally going to own this season. So let me know in the chat, guys. What are your thoughts on the consensus 11? It is projected to score 51 points. And again, our projected points are ever evolving based on underlying stats. So this could always change during pre-season or generally how we adapt it going into game week 1. And of course, once the season progresses, our projected points just become more and more accurate because we have live in-game data which can help us project the following game week. So it is worth noting that at the early parts of the season here. But yes, guys, let me know in the chat what your thoughts are on the consensus 11 here. How many of those do you own? Are there any that you're totally avoiding? And is there any there that you are basically classing as an essential in your team? I'm going to leave that on the screen for you guys here because I want to check out some more of the comments, see if there's anything that I can help you guys out with. We're coming up closer to the hour mark and I want to keep this around an hour. So this is pretty spot on for timing. We could dip into some of this and then, yeah, we might wrap it up there around the hour mark. And again, guys, if you can like the stream, I see we're at 38 likes. If you can get us to 50 likes to kick off the season, that would be massively appreciated. I know I can always trust you guys here. So we got an interesting question. Never give up FPL. My alternative midfield is Salah, Sterling and Diaz, but no Jesus then. So again, we've talked about Jesus as almost a guaranteed pick in our drafts. But he falls exactly the same bracket as Haaland in terms of a new signing for a team. The big difference between the two is that we have seen Jesus play in the Premier League and we know that he can cut the mustard in the league. Haaland, on the other hand, while I have no doubts because he has operated on the European stage against some of the best teams in the world, we have actually physically seen Jesus go up against his defences and done a good job about it. So I don't hate the thought of you ignoring Gabriel Jesus, and I like Sterling as an investment. He falls under the exact same category as Jesus. We've seen him deliver in the Premier League, but not in this league. And I think because he's 2 million more than Gabriel Jesus, I think I'd probably rather go for Jesus up front rather than Sterling in the midfield from a personal perspective as we speak. Tony Gallagher saying Bruno Gomes at Newcastle scored today. Didn't know that, so thank you, Tony, for that update. Yes, Bruno is a really interesting one. We have such small sample size for Bruno Gomes. It's very difficult to come to any conclusions about whether he is going to be a great option going forward. And the same goes for Luis Diaz. It is worth mentioning as well. Now, I think a lot of the perception for Bruno was that he was going to be a CDM operating at the baseline in the midfield and linking the defence, midfield and attack. But it really does look like Eddie Howe has changed his game. Whether he was like this at his old club, I'm not too sure. But become much more of a box-to-box midfielder and actually being a goal-scorer midfielder. And if we can see it in the early parts of the season, I think it's going to be really difficult for us to ignore him at 6 million. I think the only question mark that I would say is that his fixtures for Newcastle, while the opening game is great against Nottingham Forest, I think the fixtures start to turn. And I treat that as an opportunity for us to potentially monitor him over those games. And if he continues to be amazing value at 6 million, maybe him rather than Martinelli is a route that we should go for in our teams. Colm saying, I only have 3 of them. I'm not going to be winning FPL this season or any other season for that matter. Got to believe in yourself, buddy. This could be your season. You never know. Never give up FPL. Nacho, could you pick your 3 best 8 million midfielders? It's a big issue these days. Okay, yeah, so 8 million. I'm going to rule out Kulusevski, even though I think he's still a good option. I think the signing of Richarlison, I think, puts a few question marks on the game time of Kulusevski, although I do think Kulusevski will remain the number 1 in that right-hand side of the front 3. So I'm going to put Diaz as number 1, but only just with Saka as second best. And then I'm going to drop Mason Mount because we always forget how consistent Mason Mount is. And I have no doubts that Mason Mount will still rack up the minutes in that Chelsea front 3. So yes, I would go for Diaz because of the fixtures for Liverpool. And again, we're looking at the shorter term rather than the course of the season here. Then I would go for number 2, as I mentioned, in Saka because of the fixtures for Arsenal. And Mason Mount, number 3 at Chelsea there. Let's go. I hope that helped. I covered quite a bit of the best 8 million players there. So hopefully that helps you out. Bernardo signed for Barcelona today. Neil saying, I don't think that's happening, but I might have been wrong. Reached an agreement with Man City, Bernardo Silva, fee less than 80 million. Not sold, but an agreement. Okay, that's interesting to see. Definitely one to keep it on. And Michael saying, Undev at Brighton. He scored a lot of goals last season on loan, albeit in a much weaker league. But a goal scorer is a goal scorer, right? Yes, so Michael, that's a really good point there. So at 5.5 million, Brighton forwards are absolutely disgusting in FPL. Anyone who's played the game long enough knows. Morpay, Welbeck, these players give shivers in our body. And Undev could be another one in that line of forwards. But I want to see a bit more from him. Whereas we've seen Haaland in the European stage bang, and we've seen Gabriel Jesus, these new signings, Undev comes under the bracket where I just want to see a little bit from him before I look to invest in him. And in terms of Brighton as a team, while I really do rate them, I never look at them and think there's going to be massive hauls for those attacking players. So for me personally, I think Undev's going to be right on the watch list alongside, I can never pronounce his name, but Nottingham Forest's new forward as well. And we're going to be looking at those 2 as watch list for the coming season. That's how I view those sorts of players personally. Mads, I want 2 8 million midfielders. And because of it, I need to go for Laporte instead of Cancelo. Is that too risky? Okay, so again, it's a really good point there about going for the 2 midfielder strategy with the 8 million. Now, I think Laporte can do very well for Man City. And we've seen him over the years rack up attacking hauls. But I just think with Cancelo, his price point is 7 million, his underlying stats, his output, I do think you will regret going for Laporte over the longer term. Now, that's not to say over the first 5 game weeks, City keep 5 out of 6 clean sheets and Laporte gets 2 headed goals. You know, you're going to be laughing to the bank then, absolutely. But I'm looking at it more from a longer term perspective and from a future transfer perspective. I view Cancelo as almost a player that you could almost just put in an injury kind of considering, hold for the rest of the season and be delighted with it. So Cancelo for me is a season-long hold. Laporte will have his moments. It really depends on the strategy of the rest of your team, whether you could adopt that 8 million midfielder role, though. That's worth mentioning. West Ham has a difficult fixture of Man City compared to Kane, Spurs' fixture with Southampton. Moved to Haaland after game week 1 for his fixtures. Michael, great point. I personally don't like booking in transfers. I think with the opening start of the season, it's almost impossible to pick a game week 1 squad, it is worth mentioning, because we have such little data with new signings, with teams coming into the league. We really don't know which players are good value right now. Rashford, for example, we all might not pick him, and then Ten Hag throws a spanner in the works, deploys him as a centre forward, and he scores a hat-trick. Very hard to predict. And that's why I think rolling your free transfer into game week 2 is such a powerful move to do. Booking in the transfer automatically for game week 1 can sometimes throw up problems in the season, so it is worth mentioning that. But I don't mind the strategy. I just prefer not having it all scheduled in personally. FPL Phillips is saying about Strakosha signing not affect Raya as an option. He was the first choice goalkeeper at Lazio. So yeah, FPL Phillips makes a really good point there. Again, we hopefully can get a bit more information over the pre-season period. I just personally see Raya as such a key part of Brentford's defence over the last few seasons. And I just think it's quite surprising to see them almost look to replace him. Now, hopefully we do get some Brentford fans in the chat and in future live streams where they might be able to feed us a bit more information. Now, let's say the worst case scenario happens and Raya does lose his place in game week 1 or prior to that, and then we don't have him in our sides. Then I think Sanchez becomes definitely an option at 4.5 million. But then we can start to explore the 5 million goalkeeper department. And could we potentially take out James or Chilwell in our sides and look for maybe a combination of Edouard Mendy and Ben Chilwell in our defence? And then we can look to maybe drop the previous Chelsea defender into a 4.5. So that could be a route for us to look as well in terms of a team structure perspective. Steve saying about will Martinelli play? Again, that one is probably going to be a bit of a wait and see. I personally think he is part of the starting 11 for Arsenal. But again, if he is, amazing value at 6 million. But if you are a little bit worried about it, then I think there could be other options available to you at 6 million. As I mentioned, Bruno Guimaraes. And I think, again, we're going to be wrapping up the stream in a minute, guys. But what I'm going to say is, playing FPL is all about your own strategy. Now, for me, I like guaranteed minutes. I think expected minutes in the game is a big part of the game. That's why people like Mahrez are very difficult assets to predict. Now, if you are a manager that prefers the higher risk, higher reward players, then that can work for some managers. Whereas, obviously, with players like Bruno Guimaraes versus Martinelli, that's a perfect example there. You could go for the obvious route of guaranteed minutes in a good attacking team like Bruno Guimaraes, or you could go for someone like Martinelli, who I would argue has a higher FPL ceiling, but higher risk of rotation. And that's the brilliant part of FPL, is you could go for such a simple decision there and get such different outcomes based on your mindset as an FPL manager. So I think that's all about the dependent of the manager there. But in terms of Martinelli, if he plays, amazing value at 6 million, and I would pick him over Bruno Guimaraes personally. So guys, I think we're going to be wrapping up the stream there. I really hope you guys have enjoyed it. I see we haven't hit 50 likes, which I would love if we could do in these last few minutes before we wrap up the live stream. But I just want to say a massive thank you to those that have tuned into the first live stream of the season. I see a lot of familiar faces in the chat, which is great to see you guys back. It means that we haven't scared you off in the first season, obviously doing these live streams last year. So just to wrap up and a bit of a future outlook of this channel going forward, we, of course, are going to be trying to drop daily content throughout the back end of pre-season and, of course, going into the start of the season. Friday live streams are going to be back. I'm going to be doing Friday live streams and going to be presenting those. FPL Phillips is going to be back on the channel as usual alongside Tom Campbell as well, which is great to see. So we're really looking forward to the content coming forward on this channel. So if you are new around here, I really recommend hitting that subscribe button and dusting off that notification bell, getting it ready, because there's going to be plenty of videos dropping. Bit of a preview for next week. We're going to be dropping another top 3 series. So we'll be looking at goalkeepers and we're going to be looking at defenders. So if you have a little bit of a deliberation right now in your squads, I really recommend checking out next week's videos. We're going to be deep diving into goalkeepers, defenders, and then of course on Friday, going to be coming back to the live stream to discuss more in-depth topics. So it'd be great if you guys could drop in this chat here some topics you'd like us to cover next Friday's live stream, or even at us on Twitter, Fantasy Football Fix. Let us know some topics that you'd like us to discuss going into Friday, because we'll be inching another week closer to game week 1. And guys, I really do appreciate it. We've hit 50 likes on the live stream. What a way to end the first live stream. Massively appreciate it, guys. So thank you very much for tuning in. As I mentioned, video dropping Monday, so please do check that one out, and live stream next Friday. So take care, guys, and have fun building those game week 1 drafts.